This program is brought to you by Newsworks in cooperation with the City of Eau Claire. This program is simulcast on WRFP-LP 101.9 FM.
Excuse me, we'll call the meeting to order. Welcome to the January 6, 2020 meeting of the City of Eau Claire Plan Commission. Happy New Year to everyone. I hope everyone had a great holiday. Now it's time to get back to business, I guess. So this meeting is being broadcast live by the Valley Media Works on Charter Channel 994, WRFP LP 101.9 FM, and online at valleymediaworks.org. The Plan Commission attempts to conduct its public hearings in a relatively informal manner with the constraint that we must deal with the issues before us in an orderly and businesslike fashion. We give the applicant an opportunity to speak first, then others, either for or against the proposal, are each permitted to speak once. We do request that everyone restrict their comments to the issues before us, avoid unnecessary repetition, and be prudent in the use of time. We want to be sure that we have adequate time to review and discuss all items with equal diligence. I'd remind everyone to please turn your phones off or silent during the meeting. And if you do plan to speak tonight, there should be some yellow slips of paper on the back table. If you would fill that out and hand them to Mr. Petrie up in front before you speak, and then introduce yourself with your name and address. We have two items for a public hearing tonight, and the rest of them are public discussion, a total of 8 items on the agenda. The first item it was postponed from September 16th, 2019 Plan Commission meeting. It's a public hearing for recommendation to the City Council to recommend approval for the update to the 3rd Ward Neighborhood Plan. Mr. Noel.
Good evening, Plan Commission. Back here with the possibly the final update to the 3rd Ward Plan. We've been working, as the slide shows, with the Neighborhood Association for 2+ years. So it's been a process, but it's been very, I think the plan where it's at today has gotten better over time as we've included more stakeholders, especially with the university. And just to kind of highlight for the public here that the process, the Neighborhood Association asked for an update to their 2001 plan over 2 years ago, asked the Plan Commission to authorize that, and you did. And so we've been working with them since. We formed a steering committee with the neighborhood to try to represent different voices within the neighborhood. And we had 5 meetings to craft the draft plan. You saw the first draft in March of last year, believe it or not, that long ago, and gave us some feedback. We went back to the association with your feedback and revised that. Over the summer, we took a bit of a break to let the association, consider the policies more. And then we moved into the September draft that you saw, and the university had submitted a letter of concern, and you directed that the association and the university meet and work out these differences. And so the minutes of that meeting, the October 23rd meeting, it was a very productive meeting, I was there, are in your packet, and those amendments were then made to the plan. Areas of disagreement, they agreed to disagree from points of view related to the Hibbard parking lot is one of the issues. And then the association met on December 11th to vote for the plan. Actually, they met in November as well. We're not able to actually vote on the plan, hence the delay. December 11th, they did finally vote on the plan, and then that initiated a public hearing, which is before you tonight. So the resolution calls to approve the plan. The resolution says that it's consistent with the comprehensive plan. Neighborhood plans must be found largely consistent with the comprehensive plan. If they're not, they must be called out to show where it deviates. There's no deviations, major deviations that need to be brought up tonight about inconsistency with the comp plan. The only issue that might be is potential downzoning of properties. Ryan, if you actually pull up to the next slide, the map there The area, it's hard to see, it's actually in gray within the red boundary. Ryan's highlighting it there, is an area of concern for the neighborhood where there's properties that are single-family, apartments, duplexes, quad units, and they're interested in looking at potentially rezoning some of those properties so they're more consistent with the land use. That's going to be a study that's required by staff to look at the number of nonconformities, whether it's setback, land use, permitted use, conditional use, height, all sorts of restrictions or conditions that we'd have to look at. So we advised the association that we would carefully need to study that before we would actually downzone properties there. Also, that area is guided by the comp plan for medium to high density residential because it is closer to downtown. So that is one area in the plan that says to study the issue before actually making a decision. Other than that, you see the overview map, which is what we include in the very beginning of the plan. So at a quick glance, residents, developers, anybody operating in the neighborhood can take a look at what's the main goals of the plan, what are the main strategies. And so one of the highest concerns that the neighborhood had was to look at the congestion parking issue, which has been a chronic issue for 40+ years, and to look at studying a residential permit program in that neighborhood with conjunction of Randall Park neighborhood as well. And that's also called for in the city's latest parking study that we have to look at that issue. So that would be forthcoming. Another major concern is just to maintain the quality of housing stock there, and that the housing stock would be available for all peoples of different socioeconomic groups, to promote home ownership, to preserve the history. There's a lot of historical character in the neighborhood, to really funnel growth more towards downtown because that is where redevelopment opportunities are the best, and the zoning allows it more than, say, R1 properties, single family, and more the southern part of the neighborhood. To redevelop appropriately, so there's policies in the plan that talk about building design and that it should be compatible with adjacent properties, scaling and massing of buildings so that it's respectful of adjacent existing properties. And then as we move into transportation, complete streets, at this time already State Street has been, at least the southern portion has been reconstructed, so that has met some of the complete street goals. And as we look to redevelop that street in time to continue those complete street amenities further to the north as it goes more towards downtown. And then to look at their existing parks in the neighborhood, Campus Park and Dembler Park, to enhance some of those parks over time, and to continue code enforcement, which is always a need, and also to prevent the crime and engage residents to make sure that they have a healthy, strong neighborhood association. And it's been very good to work with this neighborhood association. They have strong leadership. They have a very committed group of residents to make sure that their interests are included in their plan. And so it's been a great process working with them over the 2 years. I've been very helpful into creating this plan that will serve them well for the next 10, 15 years. So with that, I just want to highlight the new things since your last review. So number 6, the things 1 through 5 were added from your last review, but number 6, so this meeting with the university, they decided that it'd be best to default back to the 2001 plan language on the campus expansion issue, and to look at it more from just maintaining the current boundaries of the campus. And the language used was from the 2001, so we just copied that language, moved it over into this update. That policy is to limit the campus expansion, to keep it where it is. And also, the neighborhood association voted twice to not be in favor of any expansion to the north of the Hibbert lot. The university's been looking at some ideas to add some more parking stalls to the north. The association voted twice on that, so that's in the plan in terms of the record of that. And then also the university was very wanting to be involved in the study for the parking permit program to look at that. So that language has been amended. And then softening the paragraph on parking ramps so that It didn't paint the university in a box that they would actually have to build a parking ramp, but to study that issue and to possibly work with the city if the city was interested in partnering with the university for a parking ramp in time. So those are the major changes to the plan. If you want to go to the next slide, Ryan. This is the language from the 2001 plan. I won't read it, but basically the map is the same map that's in the overview map with the boundaries delineated. So that's consistent. And the main concern at that time, and as it is today, is the erosion of housing stock. The Hibbard parking lot was once all homes. That was one of the reasons back in 2001 to maintain those boundaries. And so using the same language as the old plan. And that, Ryan, if you want to advance, just to highlight the university engagement. So originally when we created the steering committee, the association did not want a rep per se on the committee. They wanted to meet with them. And so then we met with them in March and had a full meeting dedicated to housing issues, parking issues and such. And then we met with parking staff periodically to review their own parking analysis on campus. And then in April, the Plan Commission looked at the plan. And then at your September 16th meeting, we had this opposition letter from the chancellor, and you directed us to meet with, hold a joint meeting between the university and the association. And the outcome was, like I had mentioned in your minutes, and the association voted on the 11th of December, and here we are today. So if you have any questions about the updates to the plan, the Neighborhood Association president is here, Kevin Rosenberg as well, and the university Vice Chancellor Mike Rindo.
Thank you. Any questions from the commission for Mr. Noel? Commissioner Peterson.
I think the plan is very well written. I do have some grammatical errors that I will pass on to you. I think one time you talk about 4 parks in 2 or 3 chapters, and then all of a sudden Thorpe Commons comes in as a 5th park. And then there's a couple of times you talk about projects that are to be completed in 2019. It might be nice to update whether those were completed or not. And then one question I do have, do you know if when the university does their plan, do they actually interact with the Randall Park neighborhood and the 3rd Ward neighborhood also?
Yeah, they're master planning. Yeah, they have invited them to their process.
It's nice to have it a two-way
Yeah.
street. So, thank you, but very well done.
Thanks.
Thank you. Commissioner Wolfgram.
Thank you, Chairperson Larson. I appreciate all the work you've done, Mr. Knoll. It's very clear. So you mentioned about the 3rd Ward Neighborhood Association not including the university on the steering committee, but I'd like to understand more about the rationale for that.
Yeah, from what I understand, it was, the historic tensions that they have in the neighborhood that, they felt at the time that it was more effective and constructive to meet with them separately, and so they did that way. You have to remember that the neighborhood plan is not actually for the university, it's for the association. They so ask for the plan to be updated, and they can decide who they want on their steering committee. We push as staff to say, we want to have voices that represent, renters, kind of the whole gamut on there. And so, we advise, well, we need to have the university included in this process. They thought it would be best to do that at a meeting rather than have them on a steering committee.
Could I do a follow-up?
Yes.
What was the university's perspective on that decision?
I never found that out, but again, it's up to the neighborhood association to actually have that steering committee. So if they didn't want that represented on there, then that was their choice.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions for Mr. Noel? I see none. Commissioner Gregor.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Noel, for all of your work, and certainly to the neighborhood leaders and university stakeholders and other staff that were involved too. I really, I have a stack of all these different drafts of the plan, so I really appreciate how far it's come too. One of the areas that I have been kind of checking up on as it gets updated is this housing tenure map that's on page 33 in the plan. And that's one that indicates like the owner-occupied properties, the renter-occupied properties, and the non-residential / vacant properties. And I still see some opportunities to update that a bit. I see that there's a date at the bottom that says November 2017. So I guess my question is how we can manage to update that even more since then, because I certainly am aware of a number of properties, and there may be others in the room that are aware of how we could maybe update it from the last 2 years.
Yeah, that
as to
plan
what's
has been
happening.
updated on a couple different parcels that have been brought to our attention. We'd have to run a full analysis back on the assessment data to remake that map. So we'd have to talk to staff member Pat Ivory on that ability. So.
Does that sound like something that we could do in time for the
No.
city council? Okay.
No, it'd take a while.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
So, I mean, the thing is that you could, if that's something of desire for the plan commission, you would make, the contingent approval on an updated map. The thing is that map is also coincides with tables in the plan. So if you change that, it's going to change parcel information. And this is the problem when plans get delayed, for over probably 3/4 of a year, that stuff becomes out of date, hence your point about some of these projects already being completed. So what we've done is we've made amendments to the map on the fly, but if you want a brand-new map, it's going to take some time.
Okay.
It might delay approval process. We'd have to talk to Mr. Ivory about how long it would take to get the assessment data. I mean, it might be 2018 best date. I think that map was 2017, so it might give you a year in advance. And I had mentioned that we've made some changes on the fly, depending on different homeowners that have called us that have said, well, this property is now a homeowner rather than a rental. So it's
Sure, yeah, I don't necessarily feel it has to be updated. I do think it's obviously something that the neighborhood will like to have an update on it, like every couple of years, and because I think it's certainly an important part of the goals of the plan is to make sure that we have a healthy mix, but just thought I'd bring that up and see where we're at, so thank you.
Thank you. Any last questions for Mr. Noel? All right. Thank you, sir. This is a public hearing. So is there anyone from the public who came to speak on this topic tonight? Welcome.
I guess I blinked first. Kevin Rosenberg, I'm with the Third Ward Neighborhood Association, 219 McKinley, and glad to hopefully be here for the last time on the neighborhood plan. Yeah, I think we are good with it. A lot of consternation over restrict, discourage, or limit university growth into the neighborhood, and whatever word we use here, there is a limit to what people are willing to do down there now. We did lose Hibbard Lot. There were houses there at one time. There were 3 houses on Roosevelt. Now there's going to be a welcome center. So even though we had language that the university wasn't going to expand into the neighborhood, it has, and it probably will continue to. But for right now, I think we're looking pretty good on this. So just to answer a question about the involvement of the university on the original plan, there was one individual that when someone said, should we have the university involved, they said no. And that pretty much is why the university wasn't involved. The rest of the people were kind of agnostic about whether the university should be there or not. I will say this as someone that sat through a lot of the meetings with the university there. They do tend to degrade into parking issues, and it's hard to pull it back out of that once that happens. So because the parking has been going on, you know, the issues with the parking has been chronic, as Ned indicated, that there is a little bit of an issue with that. Going forward, I think we're having a lot better relationships with the university, and we certainly are inviting them now to all of our neighborhood association meetings, which are held at the university. So if anyone has any questions for me, otherwise I will move on.
Thank you. Any questions from the commission? Thank you.
Excellent, thank you.
Mr. Rindo, thank you.
Good evening. Mike Rindo, Assistant Chancellor, UW Eau Claire. First, I want to thank the Plan Commission for allowing time for the university, the city, and the Neighborhood Association to work together to find common ground on this neighborhood plan going forward. The constructive talks we had, I think, have set us on a path of more collaboration than confrontation, and I think that's very important. We're very pleased that the Neighborhood Association listened to the concerns of the university and was willing to make some changes to the plan in order for us to be able to have those concerns satisfied. So I think that I want to thank Mr. Rosenberg. I know that he spends a lot of hours working as a volunteer as the head of the Neighborhood Association, as well as Ms. Susan Miller, who worked on this plan, and Mr. Noel. The university supports adoption of this plan.
Thank you. Any questions for Mr. Rindo? Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other members of the public that came to speak on this topic today? No one else. All right, then I will see if there is a motion to recommend approval. Commissioner Peterson.
I will recommend a resolution to recommend adoption of the plan to the city council.
Nice second.
Mr. Greigert. Any discussion? Good. So I'll call the question. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Congratulations. Thank you for your work. Item number 2 is also a public hearing for recommendation to City Council to recommend approval of a portion of a street to be vacated on Lausanne Avenue. Ms. Ness.
Good evening. The proposed vacation of Lausanne Avenue right-of-way, which is adjacent to the North Crossing, is number 2 on the map, located in the northwest area of the city. Here's an aerial of the proposed right-of-way to be vacated. You previously saw this as an annexation at the December 2nd meeting for Plan Commission, and it was passed through the City Council at the December 10th meeting. The recommendation tonight is for an action to vacate the west segment of Lausanne Avenue from the property line or the city right-of-way, the city limits to the Alpine Road Lausanne Avenue limits along the western side of Lausanne Avenue. There is stormwater drainage that is accommodated along the western side of Lausanne Avenue, and there may be some private utilities in this area. So moving forward with the resolution language for vacation of this right-of-way, staff would not bring forward a companion resolution for the elimination of the utility easements. We'd keep those in place to maintain the opportunity to use that area for stormwater drainage and other utility needs. There is an existing electrical utility that runs along the eastern side of Lausanne Avenue. Potentially in the future, If the road were to be moved to the east a little bit, it would impact potential utilities. But otherwise, the vacation is maintaining a minimum right-of-way width of 160 feet, which is consistent with the right-of-way along Alpine Road. And we believe, or staff believes, that it would be in the best interest of all parties to vacate the right-of-way as proposed. Any questions?
Thank you. Commissioner Peterson.
The area that's to be vacated, that's the white crosshatched area?
Correct.
That goes right up to the edge of the shoulder and includes the western ditch of Lausanne Avenue?
Correct.
Isn't that for drainage for the roadway and probably should stay as part of the roadway?
We're maintaining the utility easement, so the stormwater or easement for the drainage through there would still be accessible. Our interpretation is that it would still be able to be used as that, so we're maintaining that through that area through this time.
What's the advantage of it being vacated?
I believe that the owner initiated the vacation, and it will help them with their setbacks for their buildings.
Aren't we the owner of the right-of-way?
At this time, we are, correct.
So the adjacent owner
The
is
adjacent owner.
requesting it.
Correct.
But normally, when we have a roadway with a rural cross-section and we have ditches along it, we keep the ditches in the right-of-way, so we have control over it.
Mm-hmm.
So otherwise, they could come in, even if it's a drainage. If it's a setback issue, maybe they should come back and ask for a reduced setback.
Mm-hmm.
I think it should stay in the public domain, in that it's part of the road right-of-way and part of the road cross-structure.
Noted.
Any other questions from the commission? I see none. Thank you, Ms. Ness.
Okay.
Is the applicant here? Welcome.
Good evening. Excuse me. Nick Brenner with Menards, 5101 Menard Drive. So half of this white section that you see up there is actually in the township, so the town of Union. That is what was vacated back in March and what we annexed last month. We are here today to annex the northern half of that, which was always been in the city limits. And we're doing this vacating that northern half, and why we're doing this is to incorporate it into the property next to it, so we have a more developable piece of ground. To answer your question, actually, we're not vacating all the way up to the curb line. We have 40 feet from the center line of the existing road to the line that is being vacated. So there is going to be plenty of ground there for stormwater, as well as sidewalks in the future if one is deemed needed. And I have a map here if you'd like to see that at all. That kind of shows the dimensions.
This really shows it going right up.
Could you lay that down?
Fancy technology. Not gonna work. Working. Okay. And yeah, one just has the topography on it, so whatever's easiest. Yeah.
We're having a little technical difficulty with the camera there, so we'll pass them around.
So the thick black lines on there, you can see where the roadway is. Then you can see the white space in between where the sidewalk then runs, and then the right-of-way vacation runs right up alongside that sidewalk.
Did you have a question, Mr.
Yeah,
Peterson?
that shows proposed new center line. Is the road going to be shifted?
I'll have to look at the proposed new center line. I do have, just for additional information, that the street width is 22 to 24 feet right now, and the proposed right-of-way is it ranges from 207 feet to 160 feet through that area.
Leah, I didn't get a chance to get out there, but is there gravel shoulders on the west side?
Yes.
Because the cross-section they're showing there is curb and gutter, from what it looks like under the proposed.
What's that one?
Yes, it is showing curb and gutter.
So that might be the proposed road.
An existing center line varies from what the proposed center line is.
And one more question, if you would. If we do the vacation, but we retain the drainage through there, would they be allowed to do any grading in there to disrupt that drainage at all? In that it be their property, even though we have a drainage easement through there?
So the property to which is Losan Avenue right now is still Town of Union.
Okay,
And then the small portion, the white cross-hatched section that's to be vacated, that area was annexed into the city of Eau Claire from the Town of Union. So then that's the edge of what is within the city limits then.
so the part that was annexed that was Town of Union property?
Correct.
And did the Town of Union ask for the annexation? I thought the property owner had asked for annexation. And then it's town road right away.
I requested the annexation.
Yes.
So-
But,
Or Menards did.
but Menards, if it has to be vacated because it's public property, it was probably owned by the Town of Union. And yet an adjacent property owner asked for the annexation. Doesn't the property owner have to ask for the annexation? So maybe the annexation is improper. Might be something you might want to ask the city engineer about, or city attorney.
Can I just answer? Sorry. We did, so the portion you're talking about, so you see there's two different diagonals on that crosshatch. The southern portion was owned by the township. I went through a vacation similar to what I'm asking for here from you guys with the township last year. So the township vacated, and there's an ordinance vacating that portion of that right away to Menards.
Okay.
So once Menards became owner by that resolution, that is when I started the petition for the annexation, because the property that Menards owns next to this is already within the city limits of Eau Claire. So in order to incorporate that new piece that the township vacated to Menards into the property, both had to be within the city limits. So that was the annexation that we did last month. This petition here is just to vacate now that portion of right-of-way consistent with what the township vacated, but since it's within the city, we're asking for that vacation to merge in with the portion the township vacated and the Menards owned property.
Okay. Because the way this is drawn up, it shows both areas to be vacated. But
Yup,
the-
and that's
the southern,
it's
that's in
just
here
that,
then.
just that northern arrow. Ignore the ones pointing to the south, because that's already been vacated. It's already been annexed in.
And the city engineering department, even though we would retain the drainage rights through there, you have no problem from a city engineering standpoint of vacating that property?
No.
Okay, thank you.
And just one more clarification too. Since this photo was taken, those self-storage units have been added in. and there's actually an entrance drive that goes straight to Alpine. So a lot of that area that's being vacated is actually already developed. It's just that little portion south that is left undeveloped at this point in time.
Thank you. Any other questions from the commission? I have one for staff. As I recall, I had a little bit of ability to work with the GIS system when I was on staff. And as I recall, when you overlay the GIS system with a satellite image, sometimes it distorts where the lines actually are. Is that accurate? Because it looks very different when you look at it on the diagram that you passed around.
That is true. Is sometimes we can have a variation of 3 feet or so
Okay.
with the line work, depending on the angle of where the photo was taken when they're doing the flights. So there can be some variation in the overlay with the line work.
Okay. Thank you. Any other, Commissioner Gregor?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair, and this one's also for staff too. I know that this road section this Lausanne Avenue is part of a primary bicycle route within our bicycle and pedestrian plan. I guess I'm just wondering if what Ms. Ness may feel is a consequence of this, potential consequence to the ability to put bike lanes in or have a wide enough shoulder, or obviously it sounds like sidewalk is going in the future, but I guess just kind of a general question about the impact on the bicycle route.
I guess with having the amount of right-of-way that we have in this area, I don't see any negative impact to a bicycle route through the area, having 207 potentially to 160 feet of right-of-way to work with. So there's lots of right-of-way to work with through there.
Okay, any last questions? Thank you.
Thank you.
This is also a public hearing. Are there any members of the public who came to speak on this topic tonight? I see none. So I'll see if there's a motion on the commission for recommendation to City Council.
I'll make a motion to recommend approval by the City Council.
I'll second.
Thank you. Any discussion on this topic? Commissioner Peters.
With the previous annexation, is Lausanne now a town road in there as opposed to a city street?
My understanding is that Alpine Road comes down south a hair, and Lausanne did not get changed at all. But that's how our GIS is showing it at this time.
But is the section that goes between the North Crossing up to Alpine, is that a town road or a city street?
I believe it's a town road.
Okay,
It remained within the town of Union.
okay, but Alpine Road is in the city,
Correct.
okay. And hence the line between the different crosshatching,
Correct.
and that arrow shouldn't be there. The one pointing to the south part, because
To the
that's in the town yet. Or no, that's,
No,
that's
that was
the private
annexed.
property they got from the town.
Correct.
Okay, all right.
Any other discussion? All right, we'll call the question. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Congratulations, thank you. Item number 3 is a public discussion for recommendation to the City Council to recommend approval of a certified survey map with right-of-way dedication on Jeffers Ridge Road. Mr. Allen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the commission. As you see, we're probably can't see from out there, we're slowly losing our technology. So one TV down, so like one left over here. So, and the document camera is not working. So, Happy New Year. So with that, this is a request to approve CSM, Certified Survey Map with right-of-way dedication. Hence, it's a public discussion item to be recommended to City Council. The area in question encompasses 2.4 acres. That's the entirety of Lot 1, as you see here. In your packet, I did not include in the overhead here, but in your packet included what the existing Country Meadows North condominiums, what that lot looks like. So apologize if there was any confusion with that. There was kind of old planimetrics before the expansion to the stormwater detention pond occurred, so there might have been some confusion in terms of that layout as to what's actually built, as you see here. So there is a building missing in reality versus what was on that drawing. But the purpose of that drawing was to show future public right-of-way. So essentially half, the southern half of this future expansion of, of Jeffers Ridge Road, which is before you this evening. This also relates to a previous action about a month or two ago with the Jeffers Ridge Twin Homes project immediately to the north here. So this is an additional, again, access up into that project that then connects to this existing Country Meadows North condominiums. So again, with that, the CSM here dedicates that southern half of the right-of-way, which is about 30 feet, for the extension of Jeffers Ridge Road. Again, as noted, in order to access that previously approved Jeffers Ridge Twin Homes subdivision. I may have said townhomes, I'm sorry, Twin Homes subdivision. Again, this Lot 1 contains that existing, the existing condos, and again, which did anticipate that future dedication of proposed right-of-way. Construction of the proposed Jeffers Ridge Road expansion would replace the existing access drive for the condos, as you see here. You can see it is even labeled here as essentially half of that Jeffers Ridge Road. So as proposed, it would essentially be constructed on top of that and serve as the new access for those condos. So with that, again, staff does recommend approval, and this item would be considered by City Council at their meeting next Tuesday. And I'll stand for any questions.
Thank you. Any questions from the commission? Mr. Granlund.
So on the original plan, it showed the long rectangle, which includes the sewer access utility easement, as all labeled as potential future dedication. And now this is the actual dedication, and it's not that entire area, it's only through the curved portion in comparison. So it's, they had in their original condo plat, that full length of driveway was, or perhaps more, was full length expectation because they expected to build that fourth unit. And now the road curves before it gets that far, or the proposed road curves before it gets that far, and now this dedication as a road right-of-way is smaller than the entire utility corridor had been. Correct?
Okay.
Yep.
Yes. So you
Right.
can see
I'm
here
just-
that,
Yep.
good point in terms of the blue line, if you can tell that on the aerial photo here, but the blue line is essentially that full extent, as Mr. Granlund pointed out, that full extent of that right-of-way. So again, we don't have access to the document camera to show the Country Meadows North condominium plat, but it does stop there. So it's not a full extension all the way across that lot. So as shown here, that is still fairly accurate in terms of the terminus of that. Yeah, there'd still be utility easements within that. And as you can see here, more pragmatically, that would still be some, that'd be access to that easternmost building still. So essentially Access Drive still essentially continuing off of that curved portion of Jeffers Ridge Road. Again, without having all the, the full design drawings here for, what Jeffers Ridge Road and the remaining part of this access drive look like together. We're just a little bit speculating there in terms of how, that access drive to that easternmost building would look off of that roadway. So I'm assuming it'd be a fairly standardized curb cut and not just be a straight ramp off of a curve in the road.
Okay. Any other questions? Commissioner Peterson?
So in the original condo plat, it was just listed as future road right-of-way. It wasn't dedicated at that time.
Correct, future
Okay.
public right-of-way. But what, as Mr. Randland pointed out, what was designated though, right here you can see sanitary sewer and water easements. So there's still existing easements within that, even though it's not technically right-of-way.
Yeah,
Right.
it shows the sanitary sewer and water easement still on the new plat, and then the Jeffers Ridge, which curves to the north end, is going to be the public road right-of-way that's
Correct.
dedicated on this.
Correct,
Okay,
correct.
Thank you.
So, no, good point. So in terms of clarification, there would not necessarily be any right-of-way to be vacated, as you see here, per se.
Okay.
And that may be some of the inconsistency with that blue line there. That's showing more the extent of the to be dedicated and the easements and not necessarily existing right-of-way per se.
Any last questions? I see
All right.
none. Thank
Thank
you. And is the applicant here? Welcome.
Good evening. My name is Jeremy Scow. I'm with Real Land Surveying. Mr. Allen did a wonderful job of explaining basically the premise behind the CSM. I guess the underlying premise of it is just to dedicate that portion of Jeffers Ridge, so then they have the full gauntlet of 60 feet to access that new development of Jeffers Ridge twin homes through there. Otherwise, that's the sole intent of the map.
Any questions for the applicant? Thank you.
Thank you.
This is a public discussion, so we'll see if there's a motion to approve this. Mr. Christopherson.
So move.
Thank you. Is there a second? Mr. Seymour.
Second.
All right. Any discussion? Okay, we'll call a question. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Congratulations. Item number 4 is also public discussion for recommendation to City Council for approval of a certified survey map with right-of-way dedication at Comet Court. Mr. Allen.
All right. Thank you again, Mr. Chair and members of the commission. This too is a request for a CSM or certified survey map with right-of-way dedication. Much like the previous agenda item, this would dedicate the eastern half of Comet Court and essentially the northern portion thereof of Frisbee Lane. This is here. Jump ahead here. Here we go. You can see here more clearly the eastern half of Comet Court cul-de-sac, showing it as Lot 1, and then the kind of northern portion, not necessarily a precise half, so it's plus or minus 28 feet here, remaining of Frisbee Lane. That shows a little bit more clearly here. The lot in question, not necessarily all the right-of-way, kind of shadowed as you would see here. But again, the existing lot is infill in this area. Again, this is dedicating this right-of-way. Again, approximately 33 feet on the eastern half of Comet Court to complete that. Right-of-way dedication, as you can see here, the western half has already been dedicated. This too was before you previously I want to say last summer, more or less. In fact, last July. CSM for the western half, which included 3 buildable lots, and a 4th lot for an existing home on the north along Eddy Lane, was brought before you again back June and July timeframe. With that, again, the applicant is showing just the 1 lot currently, but we do anticipate additional further subdivision of this lot 1 for something similar to mirror the west side as well. So some additional single-family lots. Should note too, again, existing zoning is R1 in this entire neighborhood. So we anticipate single-family homes to be proposed in this area. So with that, stand for any questions as well.
Any questions from the commission? Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Is the applicant here? Welcome.
Good evening, members. I'm Eric Knauf with American Land Surveying. Does
Anything to
anybody
add?
have any questions? I don't, at this time, Mr. Allen has, I guess, in my opinion, adequately described what we're looking at here.
Okay. Any questions from the commission? I see none. Thank you.
Thank you.
Is there a motion on the commission to recommend approval? Mr. Granlund,
I'll recommend approval to the council.
is there a second? Second. Commissioner Christopherson. Any discussion? Seeing none, I'll call a question. Is all those in favor say aye? Aye. Any opposed? Congratulations. Item number 5 is a public discussion for approval of a certified survey map for a non-conforming lot on Gala Street. Mr. Petrie.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Members of the Plan Commission, members of the public tonight, before you is a variance for a certified survey map. This does not go to council like the last 2 items, or previous items. The proposed lot is number 5 on the map. It's located on the east side of town. Here is the CSM as proposed. As you can see, it's an existing single-family home. The lot size is approximately 8,643 square feet. The lot width is 56 feet wide along the street. This is the existing parcel that actually includes the Birch Street Baptist Church, who is the applicant tonight, along with their surveyor, Everyday Surveying and Engineering. The home, as I zoom in here, is an existing single-family home on Gala Street. It's also on the corner of Brookline Avenue that has not been built, but the dedication of right-of-way is there. So tonight, before you, this new lot is a non-conforming lot due to this 56-foot wide. The standard in R1 is 60 feet minimum. The minimum lot size is 8,000 square feet, which the applicant is in compliance with. The variance request is noted in your report. The Plan Commission has seen other variances for CSMs in the past. The Plan Commission has granted those CSM variances in the past as well. Staff would recommend approval of the request. With that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Any questions from the commission? Commissioner Peterson.
With the going down to 56 feet wide instead of 60, would that, in that we are granting a variance if we do, would that inhibit that homeowner on making any repairs, additions, et cetera, as long as they abide by normal setback?
That is correct. So the normal setback on a side is 8 feet. This would technically have 2 fronts. The reason being is because Gala Street is a front and Brookline Avenue technically be a front. Just to note that this address is Brookline Avenue currently, which is interesting because the front door is actually on the side of the home.
Okay.
So there would be 2 fronts and 2 side setbacks. So the front would be 30 feet or the average. The corner side would be 28 feet, and the other 2 sides would be 8 feet. So hopefully that answers your question, Mr. Peterson. But now you look even more confused.
Okay, so now that they're on a corner, they have 2 street setbacks of 30 feet.
30 and 28 technically.
Okay.
and then 8 on the other 2 sides.
Is there any way the street right-of-way could narrow up?
Now, without a vacation that you just approved for Losan Avenue,
Okay. All right, thank you.
Any other questions? Thank you, Mr. Petrie. Is the applicant here? Welcome.
I'm Pastor Halleck from Birch Tree Baptist Church, and I appreciate Ryan's presentation. Our reason for asking for this variance is that we want to cut off the existing house that is there from the rest of the property. My assistant is living there and will continue to live there, so we're not intending to sell it or anything like that. The entire property is one property, and we wanted to get a loan against that house. And by doing so, it would include all the properties, including the church building. The church voted against that, as well as our councilmen and deacons. So I was commissioned by them to seek an alternative way to go forward, and that was cutting off that house from the rest of the property, and that's the only reason why we're doing that.
Okay, thank you. Any questions from the commission? I see none.
Okay,
Thanks for
thank
coming. Is there a motion on the commission to approve this certified survey map? Commissioner Seymour.
Thank you. So moved.
I'll second.
Commissioner Wolfgram. Is there any discussion? I see none, so we'll call a question. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? None? Congratulations. Item number 6 is public discussion for approval of a site plan for a commercial multi-tenant building at 2610 Craig Road. Mr. Petrie.
thank you again. Before you this evening is a 2-tenant commercial building located at 2610 Craig Road. The applicant is Cedar Corporation on behalf of the owner. It's number 6 on the site plan map shown. Here's a current photograph of the site. It is the current car wash. The new proposal is to keep the existing car wash there and then add a building in front of it. This would require a certified survey map that has been reviewed by staff and potentially would be approved if this site plan is approved this evening. The zoning of the parcel is C3. That is not changing at this time. Attached in your packet is the narrative site plan, building elevation, CSM, and again, the zoning is C3. The applicant is requesting a 2,700 square feet building with a drive-through. One of the tenants is Jimmy John's, and would be occupying the drive-through. The other tenant would be a ice cream shop, retail shop. The CSM before you too has cross-access and shared parking for the facility. This new commercial would be considered infill development on an existing site that staff believes is underutilized. The parking requirement for the new building is 18 stalls. They're showing 20 stalls. They have added a pedestrian connection from the public sidewalk to the front of the building. They also will add bicycle parking. They will have a shared recyclable and trash that's currently located on the site as well, just going to be enlarged. Staff would note the site plan does lack green space and landscaping, except that along Craig Road and Mondovi Road, that should remain in place. If it is damaged during construction, it shall be replaced. Since this is a multi-tenant building, the wall signs and the elevations that are proposed is also a part of the approval tonight. They should be similar or like as proposed. Exterior lighting is noted as wall packs and should not be leaving the property. Grading and drainage report is noted in the staff report, along with public utilities, traffic and transit. With the approval tonight, there's 4 things that need to be met before they get an occupancy permit. the engineering report. They did approve the request if the Plan Commission desires tonight. With that, I would stand for any questions.
Any questions from the commission? Commissioner Granlund.
With the location of the property line very close to the existing building, do you know what the distance is from the building face to the property line that's proposed? I know the zoning doesn't require much setback, but I know there are openings in that wall that might require
Correct.
reconstruction or protection from fire.
Yes, the applicant is
safety.
here. I believe it's greater than 10 feet, but they can clarify that.
Okay, any other questions? Commissioner Peterson.
Should we ask Cedar Corporation, or you, in your write-up, you say that 2 bicycle stalls are shown on the site plan, and in Cedar's write-up, they talk about 4 bike stalls. Is there a requirement for one or the other?
It should be 2 minimum, but that technically is 4 bikes.
That's, the drawing shows it more specifically where it says 2 bike racks for 4 spaces.
Okay.
So that's the.
So we're both right.
Yes.
Yes.
Correct.
All right. Thank you.
Any other questions? Thank you, Mr. Petrie. Is the applicant here? Welcome.
Good evening, Corey Scheidler with Cedar Corporation. I think Mr. Petrie did a great job explaining the project, and I would stand for any questions.
Any questions? Commissioner Gregor.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Scheidler, obviously one thing that was pointed out was the lack of green space in this site plan. So would you be open to reducing the number of car parking spaces by 2 in order to accommodate some trees or plantings or other green space for this project? Or would you think about that, or where would you potentially amend the site plan to be able to accommodate something like that?
So this site was originally developed with a building planned for the front half of this, and when we looked at placing this particular building on the site, we were trying to find opportunities for green space and landscaping. However, due to the drainage and the grades out there, we were unable to accommodate additional green space that allowed us to have the parking needs. Being that we're going to have 2 essentially retailer business and restaurant type facilities, we felt that the parking need was greater, and we wanted to maintain the flow of traffic through the facility. So it wouldn't be out of the question. I think it would create some hardship for the project to allow adequate parking.
Thank you. Any other questions?
I guess
Thank
I'll repeat my
Oh,
question
I'm sorry,
about
Mr. Granlund.
fire protection of the existing wall of the adjacent building. I know there's not a lot of flammability in a car wash. However, the vehicle passing through has some potential for disaster, even with a hose stream on it. I would want to make sure that the placement of the parcel boundary close to an existing building didn't put that building in need of, or if it is in need of alteration, that the alteration is part of the project.
We'll certainly review that again. We did look at the setbacks that are in effect for the current building code in the state, and I believe those are met, but appreciate the heads up on that, and we'll look into that.
Good. Any other questions? Commissioner Obey.
You can correct me if I'm wrong. There is a Jimmy John's less than half a mile from this location. Is that looking to be moved to this store, or?
Well, it's a great restaurant, so we just thought we'd put more out. Actually, I'll let the owner speak to that question.
My name is Ray Thielbar. We are, sir,
Can you come up? Thank you.
that's a good question because it is very close. We are going to close the restaurant.
Okay.
On Claremont Avenue.
Thank you. Any other questions? All right, thank you, Mr. Scheidler.
Thank you.
It's a public discussion. Is there a motion on the commission to approve this site plan? Commissioner Gregor.
I make a motion to approve, however, I'd like to amend it to include only 18 parking stalls and have 2 of the stalls be for green space or plantings, or essentially amending the site plan to include that.
I think we should put the site plan on the in front of us, and then if there's a motion to amend, we can address that. Okay?
Okay.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Thank you. So we have the site plan before us. Is there any discussion? Commissioner Gregor.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to amend the site plan to reduce the number of car parking spaces by 2 and have them be green space. Is that something that we can have essentially be up to the applicant as to which 2 stalls, or I guess I'm not sure procedurally the best way to do that?
Yes. I'll let Mr. Allen speak to that.
Yeah, certainly. Yeah, again, the more guidance and direction possible here, the better. But if that's the general guidance in terms of removing 2 car parking spaces at the discretion of the property owner applicant, I think that's certainly within your discretion.
Is there a second? I'll ask again if there's a second. All right, that motion fails. Is there any other discussion? Commissioner Christopherson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to say that I really like this development idea. I like where it's placed. It's appropriate for that neighborhood. And based on the conversation and the needs of that neighborhood, if there were a possibility to just put a pot out somewhere, I trust you to put that pot out there.
Thank you. Any other discussion? All right, we will call the question. All those in favor, say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Congratulations. Thanks for coming. Item number 7 is a public discussion for approval of a site plan for a single-family home at 1830 Ohm Avenue, and the applicant is Eau Claire Housing Authority, Mr. Jonathan.
Good evening. I'm told I can just talk, okay.
We got a copy.
All right. The Housing Authority is seeking site approval for the purchase of 1830 Ohm Avenue in Eau Claire. This property is on the Eastside Hill area of Eau Claire and 1 block north of Brackett Avenue. The original asking price was $126,900, but we are able to purchase for $117,000, and that is below the assessed value of $121,000. It's a 3-bedroom house and is in fairly good condition. Some rehabilitation will be necessary. We try not to concentrate any subsidized housing within close proximity to one another when making purchases. The Housing Authority has sold 2 units on Valmont Avenue and 1 on Lindell Avenue in our homeownership program. They are not subsidized. We own 2 units of public housing on Altoona Avenue and 1 unit on the east end of Ohm Avenue. However, the unit at 1830 Ohm Avenue will not be used for subsidized rental, but will be sold as affordable housing to a first-time home buyer. We plan to use the Housing Authority homeownership funds to complete this purchase. We are before you here tonight because state law says that the Housing Authority must get site approval for any housing purchase that it makes, and I'd be happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Thank you. Any questions from the commission? Thank you, Mr. Jonathan.
Thank you.
And you are the applicant. So
Yes, we are.
we're good there. Is there a motion for approval? Commissioner Seymour.
Thank you. So moved.
Second.
Mr. Christopherson. Any discussion? Commissioner Christopherson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is such a wonderful neighborhood for first-time ownership. It's accessible. There's so many amenities in that neighborhood that I congratulate you on a great buy.
Thank you.
Great. Any other discussion? I see none. So we have the motion, right? I lost my place. All right. All those in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Thank you. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Item number 8 starts with a review of our work program for 2020.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chair, and members of the commission again. Thank you for bearing with us with the technology here tonight. Wow, look at that. There's the document camera. Just quit while we're ahead. Thank you. Good night. No, you can leave it on there. Thank you. I don't know if we can zoom in or not, but there you go. All right, thank you. We'll give this a try here. But again, have essentially everything in your packet. I will read briefly the cover memo because each year we present to the Plan Commission a report on the progress being made towards the completion of the various tasks identified in the Plan Implementation Program, which is Chapter 15 of the Comprehensive Plan. Happy to send this around. We have individual chapters available for download on the city website. There's also the entire comprehensive plan itself. Again, this is chapter 15 within that. The attached in your packet was the Plan Commission Work Program 2019 status report. I'll walk through that here momentarily. And this is the Plan Commission's work program from last year. And we included a kind of a summary of the status of each of those different items as well. The Plan Commission should review this work program on a regular basis and is responsible for updating this list of items annually. That is, again, also guided through the Plan Implementation Program. You can see there, Objective 1, talking about annual report. So again, annually we draft staff that is drafts a new work program, and that is also included here as well as a draft called Plan Commission Work Program 2020 of the planning tasks that are identified in the comprehensive plan for the current year, so for 2020. Those suggested by staff are also included, as well as those outlined in the City Council's new strategic plan 2019-2020, and I'll go through that here momentarily as well. These are items that should be pursued with this year's work program for the Plan Commission. Since last year, they've been presented in 3 different sections: administrative, legislative, and essentially other. Administrative refers to items that are expected to be completed by staff and do not require Plan Commission approval. Legislative are those items that do require Plan Commission input one way or another. And other related projects, plans, and programs is a list of tangential items that may not be explicitly identified in the comprehensive plan or may involve Plan Commission input and staff participation, just again, a little bit more in a sidebar fashion. If there are other tasks that the Plan Commission believes we should consider here in 2020, I certainly invite you to share those here as we have our discussion this evening. So with that, we will go through the 2019 status report. I won't necessarily go through this line by line, but do want to highlight again those three key areas: administrative, legislative, and other. Starting with administrative. Again, these are things that we identified last year. Essentially, this is taking the 2019 work program and putting some status notes to that. This is brought up as well. We sometimes refer to this as the annual work plan. A number of other commissions and committees, boards have annual work plans as well. We're calling ours a work program so we don't get ourselves confused with the comprehensive plan. So we talk about the comp plan and work plan. I say we, meaning me, won't get confused. So we're calling it the work program instead of the work plan. So I'm taking that cue from my predecessor as well, who may have had the same potential for confusion perhaps. But so work program, work plan. So they are interchangeable in terms of the terminology, but you'll see work program primarily throughout here. So annual development newsletter, major accomplishments, development map and report, housing affordability analysis. These are current and new things that are generally done annually. These do not require Plan Commission input or conversation, but these are things that staff routinely puts together each year. I mentioned the housing affordability analysis. That is new. That's something that was required by a state legislature and was put together by Mr. Petrie just this last month. So modernizing staff reports is something we continue to do. You may have seen some tweaks and modifications throughout the year. Again, also thanks to Mr. Petrie. Some of those are a little bit more subtle than others, and we catch ourselves reverting back to old versions at times. So thank you for your patience as we slowly integrate some new changes. One being, you can see here at the top, the title of this is in standard title capitalization and not all caps. I've been told apparently that if you put everything in all caps, it means you're yelling. So we're not trying to yell at you, except when we're talking about each of these categories apparently. So permit software update, that is literally launching today. That is starting as we speak. Permit software is the consultant is on site this week getting the building permit portion of that activated. Planning Commission training, of course, just ongoing thing as well. Legislative, these are a number of items that were again identified last year. Parkland dedication, that is identified, again I'll mention it here shortly, in the City Council strategic plan under their provide safe, functional, accessible infrastructure portion. Affordable housing policy and ordinance, that is the task force, a regional housing task force, concluded their work, and that was accepted by City Council in November, and we're actually working through Affordable Housing Advisory Commission ordinance, which should be going forward here also within moments. Multifamily housing design manual, as you know, this was adopted, updated and adopted just the last couple of months as well. Renewable Energy Action Plan, that was a whole grant project that went through all of 2019 and is looking to be adopted here shortly as well. Same with the kind of adjunctive net zero energy construction guide. Some of these as well. Congratulations, Third Ward Neighborhood Plan update. You write it down in a plan and it gets done. Block 7, this is obviously, as you know, kind of back and forth at times. The liner site project, though, that portion of that whole liner site / Block 7 is moving forward a little bit more substantially. Form-based codes, this is one too that kind of fell into the back burner, in particular related to historic Randall Park neighborhood, but we are talking with the neighborhood on other zoning modifications as well, and perhaps some modifications to their overall neighborhood plan. City Hall and Library Plaza, again, this is now being wrapped into that overall library capital project getting underway. Boundary agreements, this is one that you'll see coming forward more immediately later this year as we look at 2021 being the date when those are set to expire. Short-term rentals, actually had a meeting with Eau Claire County, both their planning staff and their health department staff, city county health, last week. And so they're making some modifications to their standards and ordinances at the county level that may impact some of the things we look at here too later on this year. Same with non-conforming uses and structures. This is something we want to include into our comprehensive plan midterm update. Again, just how we address some of these infill items. One in particular, again, just several examples here tonight, including the church property with that single-family home, non-conforming lot that looking to move forward, but trying to maintain existing moderate housing. Water Street TID Neighborhood Revitalization Plan. This is, again, something we're looking at wrapping into perhaps with comprehensive plan midterm update here this year. And finally, Cannery District TID, that plan was adopted this last August, and redevelopment plan was also adopted by the RDA last year. And I realizing that's something we could certainly share with the Planning Commission, and happy to do so perhaps as a discussion item at the next meeting. So if you're scoring at home, we almost made it on a lot of things in 2019 that are rolling over into the first quarter here this year. So a lot of these items will be completed within a matter of months, if not weeks, here in 2020. But again, a number of these things were taken care of through 2019, but are a little bit larger in nature, so have taken a little bit longer than perhaps initially anticipated. So others, kind of what has kind of transpiring on the periphery here, complete streets policy. This is being also considered with the Bicycle and Pedestrian Advisory Committee and their work plan for this year. So that's something that's looking to take shape more substantially in 2020, carried over from 2019. Same with the transit plan update. Again, talking about 2020, that's straight from the comprehensive plan. So that is on the radar with community services as well. A couple other things here. Transit center redevelopment, this too, hoping to have project proposal for Plan Commission review later this year, say quarter number 3, only because of the time involved with the federal side of things, and then also the mixed use component related to this with different developers participating. Half Moon Lake Management Plan, that final draft, actually I just saw that last week, and that's going forward through, again, with community services primarily and Waterways and Parks Commission, but that is concluding as well. Same with participatory budgeting. That project with a consultant, that's getting wrapped up. Again, all these things are coming to a head here as we flip the calendar. I saw the final draft of that report. That also came today. So a lot of things going to be kind of flowing down to various parties here in the next few weeks. Looking to launch that program more publicly with an actual kind of process and timeline here in the next couple weeks. Yet this month, hopefully getting that kicked off. You'll see that happen, and you may see a kind of call for folks to participate in a steering committee related to that. Smart housing program was how it was identified in the budget this last year. That was addressed and brought up through the 100-day sprint with a 100-day sprint homelessness initiative, kind of mid-2019. One of those outcomes is a ready to rent and a landlord mitigation fund programs. Those are also looking to launch here first part of the year. Website refresh, this was redone early last year. Still some ongoing tweaks with that, but a lot more user-friendly, I believe, all in all. And then finally, as you know, in October, we helped host the over 200 attendees at the Wisconsin State Planning Conference. It was actually the Upper Midwest Planning Conference, which included Wisconsin, Minnesota, and Iowa. And staff, we did a count, ended up leading 6 sessions, including multiple tours. So great success. Here's some items too that were included. Again, this is part of the discussion last year at this time that were added at that meeting. Bicycle parking for special events. This is one that Downtown Eau Claire Inc. reviewed early last year, and they're updating some of that information as we speak into their website information. In terms of actual policies, that is still working through more formalities with that. Reviewing pedestrian bicycle access and circulation standards as a whole. That is something to consider with the comprehensive plan update this year. And then finally, a public discussion agenda item. This was actually reviewed by the advisory committee and appointments for all boards and commissions. So this is something that's brought up related to the plan commission last year, but is being undertaken as a more holistic approach for all the boards and commissions. So I've not seen a final policy approach with that yet, but that's kind of been pushed over to that committee. So with that, that's the update where we are with 2019, which rolls over to a number of things then for 2020. So with that, happy to walk through these just a little bit more briefly. The same that you saw before with administrative. One thing that was added in here is housing infill and redevelopment inventory. This is identified more specifically in the City Council strategic plan under support economic prosperity. This is something, again, in the works, working with West Central Wisconsin Regional Planning Commission on an inventory options with Altoona as a result of the Regional Housing Task Force. So this is kind of a big lift. I put Q4 2020, meaning it probably could take all year to put this together. But the Regional Planning Commission has been very supportive in helping us kind of structure that moving forward. Some legislative things, so things that would really come to you throughout the year here. The biggest one being our mid-year or 5-year update. That is also identified in the comprehensive plan. This is something that happens kind of the off 10 years, so every 5 years. Let me try to find it here as we're mentioning that. Talking about periodic amendments is how we call it, but more specifically, regular reviews. So showing here, objective 3, continue to conduct a formal review of the plan at least once every 5 years. So here we are, 2020 already. I don't know about you, but I didn't think I'd ever talk about 2020 in any real sense. And as they always say, where's my jetpack? But it is 2020, and so we're at the 5-year mark. So midway through a lot of the plan implementation program items in Chapter 15. So I haven't structured this yet, but you'll be seeing a lot of this coming forward, perhaps even just an ongoing update even under the kind of other business here as we bring up at each Plan Commission meeting. REAP, the Renewable Energy Action Plan. So a lot of these, again, I don't want to repeat them. They're just kind of carryovers that happen to kind of spill over here into 2020. The last one on the list there, Affordable Housing Fund. We're looking at the first year of the new fund that appropriates grants or loans to affordable housing projects. Not sure all the details of what that looks like, but we are having some internal review meetings even again this week, hoping to look at timing-wise, sync that up with the community development block grant timeline. Yes?
So does this kind of imply or infer that $700,000 that's in the CIP, or is this something new, affordable housing fund?
No, correct. That it's
Something
the correct. It's the 500,000. And then the 200,000 is more specifically for we call it the Andy Lane project. So this is more specifically to the 500,000. But yes, this is capital improvement plan funding that was identified last year's capital improvement plan, and then again appropriating here 2020 budget. So yes, that's what that's referring to. A couple other things, downtown parking standards. I know Mr. Petrie's been working this as well. This also falls under a strategic plan for the City Council under support economic prosperity. Hoping to have that here early this year. Mentioned the participatory budgeting program, Block 7, form-based codes, boundary agreements, short-term rentals ordinance, parkland dedication, non-conforming uses, and Water Street TIDs. So a lot of things, not to say repeating, but we're rolling over into the strategic plan with the city council as well as the comprehensive plan update. Some other items of note, 2020 census. So we're that 2020 also means time for a new 10-year census. And Mr. Pat Ivory in the office is already working through that with a complete count committee. They've already launched and they've met at least once, I know, if not a couple times, and moving forward to that April 1st date of when the actual census would occur. So census itself takes place in March and April, with that April 1 being kind of that magic date. Complete streets policy, mentioned that as well. Transit center redevelopment, Half Moon Lake management plan, smart housing program, mentioned that as well. And so those are all the other items that kind of rolled over. So sorry to kind of talk rapid fire at you, but wanted to make sure we got all this in for discussion purposes. And finally, I will close with the overall city council strategic plan. Throughout the year 2019, worked on this final document. It says strategic plan here. This is kind of the executive summary, as it were. Worked with outside consultant early last year, kind of mid last year, and ended up with updated, kind of the bottom there, the 7 strategic goals and objectives. And those then led into something a little bit more colorful. And again, if I get clearance from the city manager's office, we can certainly send these out if that's appropriate. But you can see here, wow, that's actually really pretty. So these are those 7 strategic goals and objectives. Broken down here more visually. Again, color-coded here. I won't go to all these in great detail. But there's some subparts, and again, in a more general sense, talking about promoting downtown development, talking about other things such as promoting diversity and inclusion. And, for example, number 4 is one that will hit a lot here, Plan Commission, in terms of improving quantity and quality of housing stock, safe, healthy neighborhoods, connected neighborhoods, so on and so forth. So happy to send this out. I believe it is public information. So this is where we see references to City Council strategic plan. This is trying to make those connections back with the Plan Commission work program, back to the City Council, essential their work program, and trying to work in tandem here. All with that, again, focused on that top one under legislative being the 2015 comp plan 5-year update. So, have I stunned everybody into silence, or are there a lot of questions at this point? So,
Are there questions from the commission? Commissioner Peterson.
I have one comment on the boundary agreement.
Yes.
As in my former life many years ago, there's a lot of friction between the towns and the city.
Okay.
And we do have an agreement in place between the towns and the city, and I know it's up for renewal in 2021.
Mm-hmm.
It says here that the Eau Claire County is facilitating discussions in 2019, and yet the review and discussions with the towns is not until Q4, which is the last quarter before it is expiring. I'm just wondering if that might want to move that up to Q2 or 3, just to make sure that when it comes to when it's expiring, that we are in agreement with the towns on the boundary agreements.
Correct. Yes, exactly. And that was a carryover from the kind of the summary. This was essentially a snapshot this time last year where it talks about 2019. But yes, that's, is facilitating discussions, or could just simply clarify, began facilitating discussions. So yes, they'll be ongoing as we go through here, like you mentioned earlier this year, rather than later this year, correct?
Okay.
Yep, thank you.
Any other questions? I have a couple. Is there a timeline on when we might see site plans for Block 7 and the Liner Building and the transfer center?
Very generally, yes. I'm trying to find that here. Page, let's say page 52. I should probably number these instead of just the bullet points. Block 7, liner SIP project proposal for Plan Commission review, quarter two. So spring, roughly, working through a memorandum of understanding, MOU, right now. And then that would turn into a development agreement, kind of purchase agreement, development agreement, that would go to council. So at that point, then we'll likely see more specific site plan designs and such. Again, approximately spring of this year. Now, Block 7 is at the moment in limbo. There hasn't been a chosen project yet by the RDA, whereas Liner Site, there is a chosen project with the Children's Museum and an adjacent building.
All right. And the transfer center?
That's a little bit more elongated schedule simply because of the multiple layers, literally and figuratively, with the federal government being involved with that. Not to say that's the reason for it, but because of that, there are a lot of other steps that go with it. So that tends to extend that kind of project. So finalizing the transit transfer center itself will then jumpstart and allow the workforce housing component to move forward. But they're both working in tandem right now in a lot of those development agreement stages. So the final site plan won't come to the Plan Commission probably till later this year.
Okay.
They have until sometime next year to actually get construction started. So it's probably 24 months plus or minus.
And then the Affordable Housing Advisory Commission, this is a new commission developed by the city council. Is that a standing commission or is it like a temporary thing, or?
It would be a new permanent commission.
A new permanent commission.
Again, that's been in the works for several months as well. Simply, again, working through all the kind of inner workings of what that would look like. Essentially taking the findings from the Regional Housing Task Force. One of those was to institute board, commission, committee, work group, city-specific task force at each of the communities. So, for example, City of Altoona adopted a work plan for affordable housing and essentially assigned it to their plan commission. Here at Eau Claire, so far the direction has been to look at a standalone separate commission rather than pile more onto you.
So is this more of a work group, or is this a layer of approval, a new layer of approval that needs to be reached?
Those are being fine-tuned right now. That's what's taken the most time, is to see kind of a lot of the if-then statements, to see if this happens, then what are the consequences. So that's what's taken the most amount of time. So I don't have an answer yet because that hasn't been finalized.
Okay.
But essentially they oversee, again, a lot of the outcomes and recommendations from the task force to start.
Okay, good. Mr. Greger.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Allen. I appreciate all the updates and the work on the future here too. I guess one thing, given our ability to pass a neighborhood plan after a couple years of work for the Third Ward tonight, I was wondering if we could add an item to start work on a additional neighborhood plan in 2020. And I wouldn't want to speculate as to which one at this point, but I think there's a number of neighborhoods that could be at a juncture where it might be appropriate for them to work with the city. And I know we're hiring a new associate planner at some point this year too. So would that be something that we could initiate through the work program? Is like opening up an opportunity for another neighborhood plan?
Yes, and I believe, as was mentioned earlier, the neighborhood would essentially request permission, is that the right word, from the Plan Commission to undertake that development. If there's, again, I don't know if Pat has those memorized, all the dates, kind of what's the oldest of the group currently, or if there's a new neighborhood association that is looking to adopt a plan, that would be preferred to actually identify perhaps, one or more that would be ripe for a plan. But if there's a specific neighborhood in mind, that would be helpful. But otherwise, staff is certainly willing to kind of seek that out and see if there's one or more that would be interested in requesting that.
Thank you. Any other questions? Commissioner Christopherson.
You've raised my curiosity about, is there any update on the project that received the bid for the railroad lot downtown? I haven't heard anything about progress there.
That is also going through that MOU and development agreement process as well. Yep. But yes, you're right. That was not identified here. It could certainly be included as well, because I would anticipate a similar timeline with the liner site in terms of approvals and site plans coming forward. So we could certainly add that one in.
Okay. Commissioner Gregor.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess another area I'd like to point out of interest to me is the in our work program that's drafted here, there's under the legislative category, there's a downtown parking standards / affordable housing parking standards. That's obviously a great thing to focus on, is how we can achieve more affordability for housing and maybe more density downtown and affordability and options for downtown development. I'm kind of curious about how we could broaden that conversation a bit too, or I think this is fine as a standalone goal because it's focused. But I know our Renewable Energy Action Plan is in draft form and includes a reference to reducing parking requirements in general as a sustainability measure, which is kind of what I was getting at a little bit earlier with the attempted amendment. But I also understand that we were able to, you mentioned the City of Eau Claire strategic plan that actually has a objective to reduce automobile dependency as another essentially goal of the city. So just trying to think about all the other reasons to reduce or find ways to target reducing the amount of paved service or things like that, especially if there's like streets that have on-street parking, like Mondovi Road. So I guess would there be a possibility of having like some sort of standalone item on here that's about looking at parking, like reducing parking requirements or finding opportunities to reduce paved surfaces? Because even when we have a reduced parking requirement, sometimes we still approve projects that have even more parking than that. So.
No, good question. I think we could certainly look at revising the, title of this one. I might defer to Mr. Petrie as well, but I think downtown was the initial review in part to coincide with the downtown parking study that was recently done through the engineering department as well. And then the same with affordable housing, looking at those as kind of the key areas to focus on for addressing parking standards. But it's certainly something perhaps could be tied into the comp plan update for this year too. So it could fall here, it could fall under the comp plan portion, but we tried to be a little bit more general in the description here too, talking about reviewing parking standards to reduce cost of developing housing, subsequent demand for automobile infrastructure in a very general sense. But yeah, the title might be a little bit misleading, but the intent is to be more broad brush.
All right. Any last questions here? I see none.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Nice work.
Thank you. Maybe something to do this year.
Yeah. Any code compliance items to be discussed? Future agenda items? Any additions or corrections to the minutes? With that, and without objection, this meeting is adjourned.